Hi, good morning, everyone. I hope you all are doing well. My name is David McClung. I'm part of the INTAC team here at the University of Texas at Austin, and we're excited to be able to have you today as we start this presentation and webinar today on faith communities and as change agents and systems of care. For those who have been able to join us in the past, this is an ongoing webinar series that seeks to examine some of the ways that faith communities and congregations can be involved within systems of care to help continue to advance and promote children, youth, and family mental health. And so we're excited to be able to today to be able to have several presenters on this webinar. Before we begin, I do want to give just a couple of disclaimers and some other pieces of information. So this presentation, again, is provided under INTAC through a SAMHSA grant. Keep in mind the views don't necessarily represent those of SAMHSA, HHS, or the US government, but are those solely of the presenters. As we begin, I also want to give a quick overview of INTAC. So for those who may not know, INTAC is a multidisciplinary team that consists of a number of partners, including University of Texas at Austin, CARS, the Center for Child and Human Development at Georgetown University, Change Matrix, the American Academy of Pediatrics, Youth Move National, FREDLA, and MedStar Georgetown University Hospital. And as a piece of that, our goal as INTAC is that all children, youth, young adults, and families with emotional or behavioral health needs would be able to access evidence-based treatment and recovery services in a well-coordinated system of care. And in order to do that, we try to work with a wide array of key cross-sector audiences. Some of those include state and local agency leaders, the mental health workforce, primary care providers, the school workforce, community-based providers, peer supervisors, family partners, and youth providers, among others, or youth partners, among others. And we offer a number of different services. One of those is no-cost training, technical assistance, and resources. You'll see here some of the things that we're able to offer include things like consultation, peer learning exchanges, customized coaching, training academies, communities of practice, 5 Things Digest, podcasts, practical tools, and more. And so as we kick off this webinar today, I'm excited to tell you that we have 3 amazing individuals who are going to be presenting this morning. The first of those is going to be Carson Justice. We have Sarah McFarland, with the founder of the Link Center, and Shane Claiborne, who's the founder of The Simple Way. I'm extremely excited for you to be able to hear from these amazing individuals, and so thankful for you being willing to take time on this Friday morning to be able to have this conversation as we continue to explore the ways that faith communities can be involved in supporting child, youth, and family mental health. And so as we begin, I'm going to go on and turn it over to Sarah. And so we'll begin with Sarah, and then we'll hear from Carson, followed by Shane, and we'll have some time to wrap up this morning with some Q&A and panel discussion. And so really looking forward to this time together, and thank you so much for your time. And so Sarah, I'll turn it over to you. And Sarah, I don't know that we're able to...
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. I don't know that we can see you, but we can hear you.
Okay. I'm having some difficulties with the internet. It may be the time of day. I'm not really sure. But once again, thanks, everyone. My name is Sarah McFarland. I'm the founder of the Link Center here in Richmond, Virginia. Thanks for allowing me to present with you today. I'm just going to go ahead and start while my internet is good. So I'm going to be talking about how to support faith communities and get them more involved in empowering families with mental illness. So creating community connections for mental health. Faith community leaders are often the first point of contact when individuals and families face mental health problems or traumatic events. Many will turn to trusted leaders in their communities before they turn to mental health professionals. When leaders know how to respond, they become significant assets to the overall mental health system. People of faith have responded to illness and healing for thousands of years by caring for each other in times of need and they continue to do so today. Faith leaders can help educate individuals and families about mental health, awareness of mental health issues, make it easier for people to seek support. Community connectedness and support, like found in faith-based and other neighborhood organizations, are also important to the long-term recovery of people living with mental illness. Faith communities also are in a unique position to reach many of the millions of Americans who struggle with serious thoughts of suicide each year. Many people having thoughts of suicide feel hopeless, trapped, or in such emotional pain or despair that they struggle to face another day. Suicidal thoughts are often accompanied by spiritual crisis or a deep questioning about the purpose of life. If faith leaders are better able to recognize the signs of suicide and learn how to respond, they can serve as an expanded safety net for those in need. What faith communities and leaders can do: educate your communities and congregations. Promote awareness by educating the members of your communities and congregation about mental health issues through education forums and other opportunities. Invite local mental health experts, include those who have lived experience, to speak to your congregation or at a gathering. Showing common myths about mental health. You can't catch mental illness from someone. However, prolonged exposure to traumatic events involving someone with mental illness can have an effect on your own mental wellness. Support the development of trauma-informed communities. Trauma often lies beneath seemingly unrelated problems, leading to poor health outcomes and chronic illnesses. Identify opportunities to support people with mental illness. Faith communities can play an important role.
And Sarah, it sounds like you may be breaking up again, unfortunately. I think we're going to try to put a phone number in chat for you to be able to join via phone, and that will be up here momentarily. So if we can just give it about 30 seconds for that to happen. I do want to welcome Carson. Carson is here today as one of our other speakers. And so as we wait for just a second for Sarah to be able to join us via phone, I do want to make sure to just kind of give a little more context to this conversation. So one of the reasons that we're doing this conversation, as Sarah began to explain, is that we know that clergy and faith communities are consulted at really high rates by individuals who may be experiencing mental health challenges. And we know that to be true for adults, and very early research, again, suggests that that's also true for children, youth, and families as well. One of the things that we often see is lacking in that conversation is a lack of partnership between faith communities and mental health providers. And so one of our goals for today with this particular webinar is to really try to highlight some of the ways that faith communities across the country and across different faith traditions are really working to be part of systems of care and to be able to positively contribute to system transformation in the way that so many of our system of cares are doing across the country as well. And so today, one of the things that you'll be able to hear from, or one of the people that you'll be able to hear from rather, is Shane Claiborne. And one of the things I really appreciate about this conversation is this idea that, again, faith communities, I don't think are necessarily not wanting to be part of these conversations. I think there's really a desire to be able to be involved in some real meaningful ways. And we see some different communities where faith communities are really stepping up and they're addressing poverty, they're addressing racism, they're addressing homophobia and transphobia and some of the other things that we see so desperately impacting children, youth, and families across the board. And where those social determinants of health are really playing into that larger picture and impacting individuals, specifically LGBT plus and BIPOC youth, in ways that are extremely significant, but that may often be ignored and that those disparities may not be fully addressed. And so, you know, I think my hope is that this conversation really serves as a way for us to be able to address some of those disparities and also really look at some of the ways that faith communities can be leaders within this area, not just partners, but really those resources that faith communities bring and their perspectives and worldviews are things that hopefully could be utilized within systems of care so that we're really working together towards some of those common goals and outcomes. And so, again, I'm just really, really excited for us to be able to begin this conversation and see where we're able to go with this conversation today. It looks like we may still be waiting on Sarah to be able to join by phone. In the meantime, Carson, are you able to hear us?
Yes.
Awesome. Well, it's so good to have you, Carson. If you don't mind, we'll go on and move to you, and then hopefully we'll be able to have Sarah join us momentarily. And so I'll turn it over to you, Carson. If you just want to share some of your thoughts and experiences on this topic, we're so grateful to be able to have you today. And if you also want to introduce yourself as well, I know other people will look forward to getting to know you as well.
Okay. So I'm Carson. I'm 14. I live here in Louisa, Kentucky, and I feel like I have a lot of experience dealing with faith communities growing up in the Bible Belt. And I'm really excited to be here and talk about things. And I wanted to start off by saying my experience with faith-based communities. So when I was younger, I didn't have the greatest opinion on them because we lived by a Baptist church who would constantly tell you you were going to hell. And it was terrifying to me. And I would have breakdowns and like cry and think I was going to die any 5 seconds and God was going to smite me. But I know better than that now. And I feel like we're moving above that. And there are so many faith-based communities that are coming out and being so much more helpful and being more welcoming. And I really appreciate that. And I'm glad we get to come here and talk about more ways that they can help support youth and LGBTQ and BIPOC and anything like that today. So some ideas I have for I'm nervous. I'm sorry. Okay, so some strategies I have for faith-based communities that they can use to better engage in systems of care and mental health transformation efforts is initiating campaigns and programs for offering information and training and technical assistance, collecting data on priority topics such as SMI, SED, and alcohol and drug abuse, issuing grants supporting programs for mental illness, strengthening federal coordination to improve care, make it easier to get good care. Let's close the gap between what works and what is offered. Develop financial strategies to increase availability and affordability of care, support family members and caregivers, develop and disseminate programs for non-professional caregivers of children and adults who struggle with SMI. 25% of people called churches before seeking mental help, and 71% of clergy surveyed feel inadequately trained to recognize mental illness. Kaya Warren, an expert panelist. David, I need your help now.
You're doing great, Carson. So I really appreciate your thoughts on that. Let's just begin some conversation. And so as we think about this, let me just ask, so and we can kind of do this as a conversation. You mentioned that, in Kentucky, it can sometimes be difficult for faith communities to know how to maybe support youth and young adults. And I'm just wondering if you can maybe speak.
Maybe speak what?
And I'm curious if you can speak a little bit more about what that looks like and some of those changes that you've seen.
Okay, so where I was growing up, it was just miserable for anyone who was completely different and out of the norm from anything. Out of the norm for style of views, you had to be straight, you had to be white, you had to be up there, and if you weren't, then you were out of luck. It was very unfortunate. But now I see faith communities standing out for LGBTQ and BIPOC, and I see them advocating and Historically, FBOs have been particularly prominent in providing food, clothes, and shelter, and they have also assumed a role in helping promote housing and community development. 14% of CDCs are faith-based, which I think is amazing. And I think that being a part of a faith community is associated with positive mental or positive emotional well-being. And I've lost my train of thought. I am so sorry.
No, you're great. I so appreciate those thoughts on that, Carson. Let me ask this. So when you think about some of the ways that faith or spirituality or faith communities can be helpful for supporting mental health, what are some of those things that you see could be helpful potentially?
I think strengthening federal coordination to improve care and making it easier to get good care, and creating safe spaces for survivors and victims and youth, and helping out any way they can.
Yeah, for sure. I really like that emphasis on improving access. And I noticed, I think Lydia in the chat had mentioned that it's not only about improving access in general, but it's improving access to quality care as well. And so I'm curious, what are some of the things that, what are some of the ways that you find, your spirituality plays within being able to kind of support your mental health?
Oh, okay. So I don't have a specific religion, but I play around with sort of the witchcraft type stuff, and it's all about like caring for yourself. You have to be okay before you can do anything else. You have to have like your chakras in line, and there's like your 12 chakras, your head, your heart, your throat, everything. And to be in line is to be okay, and to be positive and confident, and to be happy. And once you're finally happy with that and you're loving yourself, it plays a huge part in how your practice and coming together with it, and it's just everything.
Great. And what are some of the ways that, again, one of the things I think that you mentioned that was really helpful was this idea that often some of the nonprofits we see, and we'll hear from Shane here in a little bit, but some of the things that we often see is that a lot of nonprofits do have a kind of faith-based component to them, or at least a faith background. And one of the things I heard you mention in that is that you're really happy to be able to see that. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about some of the benefits that you see of that, and maybe ways that you would like to see mental health professionals or other people who work with youth, like those who are on the call, be able to partner with adults in those efforts, and to be able to partner with faith communities at the same time, so that we're really kind of working all on the same team.
I'm so nervous. I'm sorry. This is like my first time doing stuff like this. Okay, so positive effects that the changes I've seen in faith-based communities as of recent, changing with the times, are kids are feeling safer. The suicide rates could be going down because they have found a safe place to be. Kids have something to look forward to, something to distract them from their problems. Not just kids, but everyone who has been outcasted by a lot of religions, who have, now that they're coming together and supporting more people, everything is just, that was really bad. I'm so sorry.
Oh, you're fantastic. I really appreciate your willingness to share. Let me ask this. So again, we so appreciate you being here. I see a question here from Tracy, who also said, thank you for being here. Tracy asked the question, what would you recommend faith-based organizations and community providers can do to demonstrate their support of LGBT plus youth? You mentioned, for example, safe spaces, and I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about what that looks like.
Okay, so something I feel that faith-based communities can do to help support LGBTQ communities or anything like that is initiating campaigns and programs offering information, training, and technical assistance. And safe spaces are I have a safe space here in Kentucky, and it's called The Drop. It's a very everything that happens in The Drop stays at The Drop. It's very safe. They take you out to help you deal with your anxiety. They give you what you need. They supply food and clothing and everything like that. And they are just a safe place for victims and survivors and people struggling with outside world issues. And I think it's amazing and what they're doing. And I think more people should be doing that.
Absolutely. I really appreciate you sharing your thoughts on that, Carson. That's really, really helpful to be able to hear. We'll have a chance to be able to hear more from you, hopefully here in a little bit, but really excited about and appreciative of you sharing about The Drop and some of the ways that you've seen benefit with that center. And so thank you so much for sharing that. I believe Sarah's been able to join us again. And so I want to turn it over to Sarah for a moment. Sarah, thank you so much for being able to join us via phone. I really appreciate your flexibility with that.
Oh, you're welcome, David. I think I'm going to keep my video off for a few minutes just to see if that helps stabilize the connection. I do live in a rural community, so sometimes I have struggles with my internet, but I'm just going to go ahead and pick back up where I left off. But before I do, I want to say to Carson, I'm so proud of you for being on today. You've done a wonderful job. I applaud your efforts. I mean, you have a beautiful smile, and keep doing what you're doing. It's making a difference. You know, keep your head up and keep powering forward. You know, I'm glad to be on the same platform as you, and looking forward to what's going to happen for you in the future. So keep smiling, young one.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So I'm going to jump back on where I left off with identifying opportunities to support people with mental illness. Faith communities can play an important role in supporting individuals with mental illness and encouraging them to seek help. Consider offering your organization as a meeting space for community conversations or support groups to address mental health issues. Provide safe spaces for peer-led programs. In our local area here, we have like NAMI programs and Vocal that are peer-led programs. Support community programs that allow people to volunteer, people like Carson, who have lived experience that want to give back to the community and want to share what their experience has been with the knowledge and education that they've gained during this time of seeking support for themselves. Plan and facilitate community conversations using SAMHSA's toolkit for community conversations about mental health. The toolkit provides information about how to plan community conversations, how to guide these discussions, and how to include information about mental health issues during the discussion. All of that information is on the SAMHSA website. It's free. You can download it, and you can even call and ask them to send you the book out. Contact individuals and families to help you that have lived experience in education. You can strengthen the connections in your community with mental health services and supports to link these services together, mental health, substance use, disability, and other social services. You know, learn the basic signs of mental illness and other facts about mental health, and encourage those that are in need to seek help. Remind other people that they can do, remind others that people can and do recover from mental health challenges, and that help is available and effective. You can train church members that work with children, youth, elderly adults, veterans, and LGBT communities to identify signs of depression and suicide and offer supports and resources. Develop relationships with local mental health service providers and other family and youth organizations that help direct individuals and families in need to available services and supports within the community. They can also use SAMHSA's treatment locator, which is on their website and their community newsletter. You can promote acceptance of those living with mental health issues. The voice of community leaders and members of faith-based and community organizations can greatly influence attitudes about mental health conditions and those who experience them. You can talk about your own mental health openly. You can be an example of taking good care of yourself and doing good self-care practices. You can be inclusive, because mental health affects all of us. You can foster opportunities to build connections with individuals and families dealing with mental health challenges through trust and acceptance. You can ask what happened instead of what's wrong when supporting people in need. You can also encourage and express empathy within your family, your congregation, and your community by conveying a message of nonviolence, acceptance, and compassion. You can build awareness by addressing stigma and developing understanding. You can actively welcome people to come into your safe spaces and create those safe spaces. You can become a community of healing and a center of support for healing and recovery by, creating those safe spaces. And those safe spaces may not always be within the walls of the four walls of the church. Doing things within the community, because there are some people that live with religious trauma. So coming into a church may not be a place that they feel safe at. But if you do something in an open community center or a YWCA or YMCA, any kind of local place where people can congregate or can get together in small groups right now because of the pandemic, I think that offers a sense of support without the religious overtone hanging over the person's head, which may make them reluctant to come in because of past experiences they've had. Advocate for understanding in your neighborhood, and just be proactive when it comes to having these conversations. Don't shun away from them. I know that in the Black community, faith is a huge part of our culture. It has helped us, for centuries now, just maintain mental wellness and to cope with life's difficulties. And I know that when it comes to mental illness and how we process that, there's, a huge stigma there, and we have our own personal bias when it comes to mental illness. So we're not always welcome to have those conversations. So I would say, spend some time by yourself and really ask yourself, why is it an issue? Why is it that you don't want to explore having the conversation about mental illness? Is it something that you feel like is going to make you vulnerable? And if it is, then, find someone that you can trust to have these conversations with in an intimate setting, and then move forward from there. I know with my own personal experience, I did not grow up in a church community. There was a lot of violence in my household, and I have a diagnosis of PTSD as a result of being exposed to ongoing exposure to trauma and violence. I've lost women in my life to domestic violence. I was raised by alcoholics, and there were some other addictions there in my household before the age of 18 when I left. So I have experienced a lot of very unfortunate things, and living with PTSD is not something that I was forthcoming with in the work that I do now. But what happened is, when I left home, I chose a job working in behavioral health, not really knowing that it was going to heal me as I thought I would try to heal someone else. And it was there that one of the persons that was there for treatment said to me, hey, I kind of recognize some of your symptoms. You may want to discuss that with someone. It's not a bad thing. I'm just saying that I know how hard it can be to accept that for yourself. And that was a very good piece of advice that she shared with me, because I went to my supervisor and I said, I think I need to talk to someone about the things that's going on with me, because what I did from childhood was learn how to create safe spaces for myself so that I wasn't triggered. So because I avoided those triggers, I didn't have to always be in contact with the emotions that came as a result of the PTSD. I stayed away from alcohol. I stayed away from large crowds. I limited my contact with people that I trusted. I didn't allow any unpredictable behavior to be around me. Even when I was a mother and I had children, I wouldn't let my children listen to loud noise. They could only play outside of the house. They couldn't play inside. They weren't allowed to wrestle or knock around things. And, those were safety nets for me to manage my PTSD that I didn't know I was living with. And it wasn't until I became really transparent with a counselor and talked openly, with this counselor, that I, accepted that, okay, I'm living with PTSD and I've managed really well for a long time, but now I need to pursue some other education, and I need to develop a wellness plan for myself. During this time, I did go to church and I was looking for additional support, but I did not find it there. What I found was they thought I was isolated and rebellious because I didn't give so much of myself. And that's what I was told. You're being rebellious because you don't want to do X, Y, and Z. But the truth is, I just didn't feel safe. And no one ever asked me why I didn't feel safe. No one ever asked me what my personal experience was. So I don't hold the pastors accountable for not knowing what to ask. What I decided to do once I started to get better is start an organization where I could provide information and resources to pastors within the community and faith leaders to help them understand that when people come in, we know that there is this need for support on that spiritual journey, for that guidance, for that spiritual piece. But there's a lot of brokenness that people bring with them to church. And I think pastors need to be more empathetic. And I think they need to develop personal relationships with their people. I don't care how large the church is. If you have a call to be a pastor, one of those things should be to service the people that sit in your congregation as an individual, not just the person who is in your seat, because people are suffering and they're suffering in the pews, and they need to know that they can depend on you as their faith leader for guidance and support. So I beg pastors to please get a better understanding of trauma. Please get a better understanding of how to support people with mental illness and address your own bias when it comes to that, and support people, who may not have a lot to say. I wasn't one of those people who was in the church saying, hey, this is what's going on. I was just the opposite. So I was there, but because of my heart, I used to bring in other people. So I became somewhat of an asset to a lot of churches because I would bring in other people because of my nurturing manner. But I was not taking care of myself, and I was hurt and wounded. And like I said, I just never, had anyone to come to me and say, hey, what's going on with you? Why don't you ever want to participate in, X, Y, and Z? Why is it that you don't want to go, to this place? And, if someone had asked, I'm sure I would have said, I don't feel safe when I'm in large crowds of people. And if they had explored more, I would have said to them, I was in bed with someone when they were murdered, that had an effect on me and how I perceive people. I only keep certain people close to me that I know I can trust to make sure that I'm safe. So, I know I just said a lot. One of the other things that I feel like could be a great asset to faith leaders and pastors is NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. Their programs are free. I'm a member of NAMI, a facilitator of several of their programs, and I'm a former board member. And, I stand by the fidelity of their programs. What's done here in Virginia in a program is done in California or in Canada. They're true to what the program is supposed to be about. And it's inclusion, it's about support, it's about education. And, I really enjoy being a part of that organization and going out into the community and facilitating those programs.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I really, really appreciate you sharing. As we get ready to continue these conversations, we're going to move it over to Shane. And Shane, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks. It's great to be a part of the conversation, and I've really appreciated the contributions of Carson and Sarah. A little backdrop for me is I've got my Tennessee accent and I can't hide it. I grew up in the Bible Belt, and I was thinking as Carson was sharing, my experience was similar, a little different. I mean, I fell in love with Jesus in East Tennessee, but then I began to see some of the contradictions in the church that were often good at excluding the very people that were magnetized to Jesus. We're very often known more for what we're against than what we're for. And so I kept kind of leaning into my faith, but I left much of the more toxic versions of the evangelical church that I grew up with. And now I'm a part of a network called Red Letter Christians. And we get our name from the old Bibles that have the words of Jesus highlighted in red. We like to say we're aspiring to live as if Jesus meant the stuff he said. and we really resonate with Gandhi, who said, he was asked about Christianity, and he said, I love Jesus. I just wish the Christians acted more like him. And that became sort of where I found myself. That, a few years ago, a study was done by one of the leading research companies, the Barna Research Group, and they went to every state in the United States, and they asked young people, what are your perceptions of Christians? And the results were heartbreaking. The number one answer of what young people in every state in the US, what the number one answer was, when people hear the word Christian, they thought anti-gay. Anti-LGBTQ. The number two answer was judgmental. And number three was hypocritical. And, that probably doesn't surprise many of us, but it did break my heart when, I think of Jesus saying, they will know that you are Christians by your love. Love didn't even make the survey, right? So I, have been organizing now Christians around the country that are not going to be using our faith just as a ticket into heaven and an excuse to ignore the world we live in. And I think for too long, we've in the church, we're good at promising people life after death, while not realizing that a lot of people are asking, is there life before death? Doesn't our faith have any relevancy to the struggles that people are living in right now? And so we kind of get obsessed with saving people from hell while ignoring the hells that they're living in right now. And I want a faith that's, relevant to where people are at. And when I look at Jesus, he's not just talking about pie in the sky theology, but he's talking about widows and orphans and day laborers that aren't paid enough and unjust judges that don't treat people fairly. Jesus is talking about the kingdom of God, not just as something we go up to when we die, but something we're to bring on earth as it is in heaven. So it's not just about saving souls, but challenging systems, right, that are hurting and crushing people's lives. So the last 25 years, I've been on the north side of Philadelphia, and I brought a few pictures that I'm going to show in a second, because I feel like some of these Zoom calls can kind of feel a little flat sometimes. So I'm going to try to bring a few pictures of what we've been trying to build in Philadelphia. But one of my mentors is 90 years old now. He is the child of sharecroppers in Mississippi. His name's Dr. John Perkins. And one of the things that Dr. Perkins taught me when I was 20 years old and we were starting our community is a proverb. And he says, go to the people, live among them, learn from them, love them, start with what they know, build on what they have. And in the end, the people will say, we've done it ourselves. And so the model of Dr. Perkins and the movement around him is called the Christian Community Development Association. And it's very similar to a lot of the language I've heard on this call is trauma-informed, community development, creating safe places for folks that have really been crushed by some of the policies and systems and struggles in our neighborhoods. And so our community started with that philosophy of kind of living among the folks that are marginalized in Philadelphia. And our community started in an abandoned church building, which I guess you probably won't miss the irony that, the church has been pretty good at leaving the neighborhoods that Jesus moved into, right? and so this abandoned church was sitting there for years, and then it began to be taken over by many homeless families, in particular mothers and children. And so they started living there. And the Catholic Church, sadly, told them that they were trespassing, and if they didn't get out, they could be arrested for trespassing on the church's property. And these really courageous mothers, they hung a banner on the front of the cathedral that said, "How can we worship a homeless man on Sunday and ignore one on Monday?" And they held a press conference and said, "We mean no disrespect to the Catholic Church, but we don't have anywhere to go. There's 3,000 families on the waiting list for housing." And they said, "So we've talked to the real owner of this building, the Lord Almighty." And God said we can stay. And they did. And, I got married in that old cathedral. Those families became our mentors, they're friends to this day, that some of the kids that were young in that church are now leading so many of the beautiful things going on in Philadelphia. So I'll show you just a few pictures here, and then I'm excited to be a part of the conversation in a few minutes. So this is the old cathedral where we started there, and I'll show you just a few pictures from the neighborhood. So we're, it's a really densely populated neighborhood. We have a lot of our houses they're all connected, but that creates a lot of opportunities for. We're most interested in not church happening in the buildings on Sunday, but church happening in the streets every other day. And so trying to think about how we can be present in our neighborhood. So we've got a lot of abandoned buildings, and we are bringing a lot of that back to life. And we've built a lot of our programs to where they're adaptable into the streets to have, some of these are before COVID, so we've had to pivot a little bit, but a lot of what we've been doing is just creating community in the streets. And a lot of that happens pretty naturally, but we've created some rhythms. A lot of it's based off of some of the rhythms of the recovery community. This is a recovery community in Philadelphia of all folks recovering from substance addictions. And so we have a lot of rhythms of our community that work with folks in recovery from substance addiction. We do a lot of meals together. We're trying to create a space of belonging, right? And I think that's kind of our model, is that our deepest longing for all of us is to love and be loved. And once you get the sense that you're loved, everything else gets a little bit easier. So these are some of our block parties and street parties that we do. We have almost every month something that brings us together in the neighborhood. And we really believe in joy, right? We believe in life and kind of the defiant hope that things don't have to stay the way they are. So we take a lot of the abandoned properties and turn them into homes. That's a before and after of one of the abandoned houses. Affordable housing, dignified affordable housing is part of what we do, but we also do a lot of gardening, reclaiming abandoned space. And I find that's a great way to, bring people together and do something life-giving. So we're growing a lot of food. That's a before and after here of a fire that we had that burnt down about 12 houses, and we rebuilt a park there that we call Phoenix Park because it came out of the ashes. So all of these are just images, I think, of what community looks like, but it also is about healing, right? We always say that we're praying for God to heal our hearts, but also for God to heal our streets and our world. And on the wall of our recovery community, it says, we cannot fully recover until we help the world that made us sick recover. So a lot of this is kind of bound together, that our own personal recovery is given fresh life by doing things for others and kind of challenging the systems and structures that are hurting people. So I'll just, one of the things I wanted to invite you to think about and just share from our own life in community is that as we're building community, we've also found it very life-giving to challenge the structural issues that are hurting people. So one of the things that we have in our neighborhood is a lot of addiction, especially to heroin. And our young people kept finding needles on the ground. And even one of them was having a snowball fight and saying that they were scared they were going to find heroin needles in the snow. So that became really one of those things that, as you think of trauma-informed communities, we needed to channel the anger and the frustration and the pain from that And so I'm going to show a picture in just a second, just to give you a heads up, that has heroin needles in it. And there'll be a couple of pictures that have a gun in them as well. So if you don't want to see that, feel free to tune off of the screen for a second. But we found, we had this idea that was prompted by the young people in our neighborhood that had, become too accustomed to seeing folks overdose outside of our homes and needles on our streets. And so we had a campaign called Need a Little Help, where the kids and all of us as a neighborhood, we gathered up the needles and we packaged them in safely in these containers with quotes from the children, and we delivered them to our city officials, demanding that our opioid crisis be seen as a public health emergency. And so we had a press conference where the kids delivered jars of needles to our health commissioner and our mayor and our council folks. And we also had folks that are recovering, because we wanted to be clear that the answer to this is not more jails, but this needs to be treated not as a crime, but as a medical condition, right? We need more recovery resources. And it was amazing, so our kids marched these jars of needles to different city officials. And one of them told me that they still have them on the wall to remind them of how urgent this is. And we pretty immediately saw a response from our city to declare it a public health crisis and emergency response of funding and other things. But it all came from our kids, right? And I think that for everything for us, it comes from the people on the ground in our neighborhoods. And just one more example of that is with the gun violence that we've experienced. We, like many of your communities, are seeing a surge of gun violence and suicide in the pandemic. Our gun death rates are the highest they've been in 3 decades. And Philadelphia just passed the 500 mark of 500 gun deaths this year. So there comes a point where Martin Luther King said so well, we're all called to be the Good Samaritan, and referring to the story in the Gospels, where we're called to lift our neighbor out of the ditch. But after you lift so many people out of the ditch, you start to say, maybe we need to rethink the whole road to Jericho. And we've got to do something to prevent people from ending up in the ditch to begin with. So this is a powerful image of some of the churches in Philadelphia that have now put out memorials for all the lives that have been lost to gun violence. So, over 500 t-shirts with the names and ages of those who are killed. And one of the other things that we've been doing that I wanted to close with was we needed a way that people can channel their pain and their trauma from gun violence. And so we became inspired by the verse in Micah and Isaiah in the Bible and the prophets, where they say, God's people will beat their swords into plows and their spears into pruning hooks. And we began to invite people to donate guns. And we've had hundreds and hundreds of guns donated now from all over the country. And we decommission them. But we also invite people, and we turn them, this is our first gun donate, was an AK-47. And we turned it into a shovel and a rake. It's pretty sweet, right? And so we've been doing it ever since. And we've got images from folks all over the world now too that have been turning guns into guitars and saxophones that play music, into art. But one of the things that we've been doing is taking guns and inviting people who have lost their loved ones to transform the guns into garden tools. And this is a mother, Miss Ryan's in our neighborhood, who lost her son. She's got a picture of him there on her shirt. And as she began to beat on the gun, with every hit of the hammer, she said, "This is for my boy." And it really felt like she wasn't just transforming a piece of metal, but she was transforming the world, right? And in the church, we have a word, sacrament, that means holy mystery, and we sometimes refer to it around communion and the breaking of the bread. But I think when we're turning guns into garden tools, it's also sacramental. And we found that it's a way that we can honor people's pain and their grief and give them an opportunity to literally kind of beat on the metal and transform it into something else, and kind of proclaim that just as a piece of metal can be made different, so can someone's heart, right? That's been filled with hatred or violence or racism. People can be made new. and our neighborhoods can be made new. We can transform them from places where death has become way too normal into places where we really see life flourish. So those are just a few images, I think, to add to the conversation, and not to be prescriptive, but just to kind of stir our imaginations, and for us, obviously Martin Luther King is a really incredible inspiration. And one of the things that he said is that the church is not meant to be the master of the state or the servant of the state. The church is meant to be the conscience of our state. It's meant to be the prophetic conscience that stirs people to do something about injustice. And so I think some of our actions of transforming guns, or the things that we did with the heroin needles, are to kind of shake people a little bit, right? And say, this is not okay. And it doesn't need to stay this way. People's lives are at stake. And we also believe that the people who have been most deeply impacted by the injustice should be in the forefront, right? That we're not just to be a voice for the voiceless, but we are actually to come alongside those who have voices, but people aren't listening. And sometimes we don't need to hold the microphone, we need to pass the microphone. And so in everything that we do, we kind of use the model that we are wounded healers, that the best folks to help someone coming off of heroin is someone that's got, a few years sober. The best person to help a woman coming out of domestic violence is someone that survived it. And so that wounded healer model is kind of in everything that we do, that those who have survived much have many gifts to help others who have been hurt. So we lead out of our scars. Our scars, the things that we've survived, are not our liabilities. They're our credentials. So thanks for letting me share. Just really glad to be a part of the conversation with y'all today.
Thank you so much, Shane. I can't thank you enough for your willingness to share, and the work that you, as well as your community, is doing to be able to address these great needs. As I hear you talk, one of the things I heard you mention is the importance of having people who have that lived experience being able to walk alongside those who are going through systems and going through similar experiences in the present moment. And what I really appreciate about you sharing this is, within systems of care, we often think about this as peer support. And we talk a lot about the value of lived experience in that. And I don't know that I had theologically put together the theological connection between the wounded healer and what that means in terms of peer support. I think one of the things I have a question about, Shane, is often the term that we hear used in faith communities with this is we hear a lot about testimony, and testimony sometimes more means coming along and sharing a piece of that story. But what I hear you say, and where I agree with you, I think, is there's this opportunity at the same time for peer support to really be embedded even within faith communities, where that lived experience or that testimony is not just coming up and sharing a story, but it really is walking alongside individuals in some really significant ways and living among people. And I'm curious, it seems at the same time that, and Sarah and Carson, I'd love your thoughts on this as well. It seems sometimes that faith communities are challenged in being willing to be vulnerable, or challenged in being willing to say, this is an area of need, and doing so, saying, hey, I'm a person in recovery, or I'm a person who has a mental health challenge, or fill in the blank, is something that's often kind of stigmatized, I think, within faith communities. And I'm wondering, what does that look like? How do you start to build that within faith communities, and how do you build a culture, I guess, of vulnerability, where people are willing to have that kind of relationship with one another, and where people become open to doing so, given at the same time that so many things are going on, and where human instinct often in the midst of pain and injustice is to withdraw rather than to maybe connect.
Thanks, David. I mean, I'll start, but I sure want to hear from, Carson and Sarah as well. I think some of it is that the church has a lot to learn from the recovery community and other movements that are peer-based, right? I don't think that anyone's looking for Christians that are perfect. They're looking for Christians that are honest. And the problem is that many people's experience with Christianity, and I know we probably share many different faith traditions and things like that. I'm just speaking out of my own, that Christians have often acted like we're perfect. And pointed fingers at everybody else. And I think that a different model of building community is saying that this is not for perfect people. This is for very imperfect people that are worshiping a God who perfectly embodies love. And we're all trying to help each other become more like the God that we worship. I went to one.
Hello, everyone.
I went to one church that had shirts on the greeters at the door that said, "No perfect people allowed." And I thought that's a great message, and I think that's where I would start, is just by saying we need a different posture that we are coming with, which is, come as you are. And the more that we can create spaces that are safe for people to be honest about their struggles and their contradictions, the better off we all are, with that kind of honesty. So one of my friends, he always says, when people tell him the church is full of hypocrites, he says, "No, it's not. We've always got room for more." So that's the kind of church I want to see.
Thank you, Shane. Sarah and Carson, I would also love to be able to hear from you all.
Well, I think I'll just piggyback off of what Shane said. I think there is this need to portray perfection, that, there is nothing wrong with you, that everything is okay, especially within the Black community. We have a history of brokenness, and we always want to appear that we're stronger, and resilient, because there's always this underlying message that we come from. We're descendants of slaves. And if they could make it through that horrible experience, then surely we can deal with everything else that comes at us, on a day-to-day basis. So we put on this cape, and, we want to believe that nothing is going to break us, So when we're going through things, it's become our common practice to just grin and bear it, because we come from descendants of slaves. I've heard it, my entire life. You can get through this. Our ancestors went through, far worse than this. So whatever it is that you're dealing with, you can manage it. It's never any direction to seek support or get support. It's just that you can handle it. Just pray about it, take it to God, lay it on the altar, and everything will be fine. So, one of the things that I like to tell people is we have never been conditioned to take a broken arm and lay it on the altar. We take it to a specialist. And it's the same thing when we have issues with our brain, which is, that's where our mental illness comes from, or our mental wellness, how our brain functions, and there are people who have chemical imbalances, but there are also people like me who have experienced, prolonged exposure to trauma that has altered how we developed, in our childhood years. And, I think for me, I always take the lead by saying, okay, if not me, then who? Because I know that there are other people who've had the experience, but they may not feel brave enough or courageous enough at that time to let the light shine on them. It's a place of vulnerability. You're exposing yourself to people, and you don't know if they're going to accept you in your brokenness or not, So it's really a place of fear, and getting to a place where you can feel comfortable with who you are and whose you are, the way we say in church, to be more comfortable with just exposing yourself. And it is an exposure. You're opening your entire self up to someone else and saying, here are my flaws, and these are the things that I'm working on, and this is what I've done to get better, and this is what you could practice also. You don't have to keep all of these things to yourself. You can share them with a trusted loved one. You can, we have the internet now. There are, even lines where you can text people and talk if you don't want to use your voice to speak. And, I think that has a huge part. People just don't want to be vulnerable. They don't want to be exposed, because we see so little, like Shane said, of that love from God. We expected, I think, that vertical love is coming from God, but we don't see a lot of it horizontally. And we're looking for examples of that, you know, when we go into places. And if we're fortunate enough to go into a church or we run into Christians and they have kindness and genuine concern for us, I think that does open the door. But how we get to that place in everyday life, I'm not really sure. You know, how we can, you know, train, you know, I guess part of what we can do is just train people to be more empathetic, you know, because that's something that you can learn. And I think with that empathy and compassion piece, we're more willing to accept people where they are and not want to change them into who we want them to be.
Thank you so much. Tracy, I see in the chat, asked the question. She says, how would you recommend that systems of care reach out to faith communities to help support connections and support young people with mental health needs and their families? And let's begin, Carson, if we can begin with you for that question.
I have to reopen it up in the chat. Hold on. Okay, so I think that systems of care should reach out to faith communities and support for young people with mental illness, you know, everything. I'm so sorry. Okay. I think they just need to contact them directly and start making connections with them and helping build financial strategies and everything they need to help support young people. I think that they just need to start initiating and collecting data together and making their priorities. Thank you, Jennifer. Yeah, I just think they need to just straight reach out and start talking about what needs to happen and changes that need to be made in this day and age.
Thank you, Carson. Let's go to Shane and then we'll go back to Sarah.
Well, I think that there needs to be, if we're going to build a relationship between faith communities and communities of care, it's tricky because faith communities is a really big umbrella, right? And there's some churches that I don't think are ready for, they're not a safe place for folks. So it's hard to kind of have a broad brush, you know, but I think all of this is relationally based, right? It's trust based. And so I think we can figure out where the congregations and faith communities are that are ready to learn from each other. And I've always liked that proverb that says, basically, if you've come to save me, you're wasting your time. But if you've come because our salvation is bound up together, then grab my hand. We need each other. And that's kind of the posture I would suggest, is that just as communities of care can support and or get support from the church can also learn a lot from communities of support and care and need a lot of training on mental health and trauma. So I guess I would just say we got to build a kind of egalitarian relationship of trust where we can learn from each other, and it's not just exploiting each other for what we can bring to the table, but really trying to do better together because we're wiser together than we are on our own.
Thank you, Shane. Sarah, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I was just going to say, you know, as far as the systems of care go, I know we've been conditioned as a people not to talk about faith in the workplace, but I think there are a lot of believers that are within those systems because they have a heart to serve. And I think one of the greatest resources that, you know, is that there are people there that are believers within the systems of care, and they can take the initiative to start reaching out to faith organizations and, you know, nonprofits that provide services to people who are wounded and, you know, just people who need help in general. I think using people who are there in those positions that have knowledge of who Christ is, but are also in the helping profession could be, you know, the greatest allies for bridging that gap there.
Thank you, Sarah. So let me ask this, and I'll start with Shane on this. Shane, one of the things I'm curious about is, I imagine there may be, again, we've got a pretty wide array of different individuals on this call. And that includes individuals in urban areas, it also includes rural areas, you know, again, a fairly diverse group as a whole. But I'm curious, where do you begin this kind of work? You know, I imagine there may be people on a call like this today who are looking at and hearing the amazing work that you're doing in Philadelphia. And it's awesome to be able to see in Philadelphia. I think the question is, if I want to do something like this in Georgia or Pennsylvania or Kentucky or any, you know, fill in the blank, where do I even begin to think about this work? And what does it look like to try to bring that to scale? And maybe you can share a little bit more about how you began some of that as well.
Well, just briefly, I mean, I'm really so honored and humbled to see all the faces on my screen and all the wonderful work that you all are doing already everywhere. I feel like I've got so much to learn from it. One of the things that I would offer the conversation, I guess, is I learned from Mother Teresa. I worked in India before we started the community in North Philadelphia. I had the opportunity of working with Mother Teresa and the Missionaries of Charity in India. And one of the things that I learned, I worked in the home for the, what was called the home for the destitute and dying, where we would bring people off the streets who were dying alone. And we would spend their last minutes with them, their last hours with them, holding their hand, you know, praying if they wanted to, singing if they wanted to, whatever. And one of the things I will never forget is that Mother Teresa used to say, what's important is not how much we do, but how much love we put into doing it. We're not called to do great things. We're called to do small things with great love. And that really shaped our community, because I think one of the things that is similar between the church and faith-based programs and some social work and care-based programs is that we can treat people like numbers, and we can treat people with a degree of distance. And there is something to be said for, like, when we're talking about our work, that we can build all kinds of affordable housing and people still not have a home. We can have really good healthcare and not have someone holding our hand when we're dying. And so what's just as important as efficiency is that presence of love. And I think all of us can be challenged to, you know, to be more intentional about being present with the people that we are with, and not just treating them as clients or consumers or a number, but someone that is made in the image of God, has unfathomable value. And as we look into their eyes, we're looking into the eyes of Christ, because they're made in the image of God. So I think that kind of holiness of the work that we get to do is kind of where, you know, I would start on that. And that's kind of regardless of context, you know, rural or urban or whatever. I think is kind of going, let's do small things with great love. You know, that was a sign we had above our front door. It said, today, let's do small things with great love, or not answer the door, right? Because if we can't be present with someone, then maybe we just need space for ourselves, and that's okay. But if we are going to answer the door, let's try to be fully present with whoever shows up there.
Thank you, Shane. Carson, what are your thoughts? I know you're involved in the drop. You're doing some other amazing stuff to try to increase some of this awareness. What are some of the ways that you see room for some of these conversations to further develop, and where you see them kind of going?
Okay, so I feel like all times, unless there's a lot of ignorance and stubbornness in a lot in there, I think it's fairly common in faith-based communities that there's ignorance and stubbornness where with changing and being accepted and acceptance. And I feel like if we're going to have the conversation, the time to have it is now. And maybe some churches won't get it, and maybe we're just going to have to go on without them. But everyone needs to feel safe and welcomed and heard. And we need to work on that and reach out to other people. I feel like systems of care shouldn't be the only people reaching out. I feel like churches should also be making the effort to reach out, to change, to stand for what they actually believe in. We've been mainly talking about Christianity here, but there's more than just that. There's so much that the faith community contributes and what we need to do, and we need to just go out with it and start working now and make things safer. I'm sorry.
No, don't be sorry at all, Carson. I so appreciate your willingness to share and your willingness to speak on this topic. So let me ask this. One of the things that also comes to mind with this then is I'm curious if both of you can talk a little bit more about some of the needs that you see are present within your community and some of the needs that you see young people facing within Philadelphia as well as within Kentucky. Shane, I know you've touched a lot on this with some of the stuff that you shared earlier. But I also know you're doing a lot of other work, nationally, and you're doing some travel and other things to places where you're seeing these needs at a larger level as well. And so I'm curious to hear from both of you. When you think about some of the needs that youth and young adults are facing today that you would hope to see faith communities more involved in, what are some of those issues and what does that look like in the lives of those young people and their families? Let's start with Carson.
Okay. So while we're on this topic, I would like to bring up something I'm working on at school because there's a lot of issues pressing, and it's something that I would also like to see faith communities do. There's a lot of sexual assault going on in my school, sexual harassment, bullying, and nobody's being heard. And I feel like churches should also make a safe space and be hearing students and peers and just anyone in the community who's going through stuff like that, because I feel like there's a lot of stigmatism with the sexual assault and churches and nobody believing them because the whole preacher or pastor is sexually assaulting someone and they don't believe them because how could a man of God do something like that? I feel like churches need to be more open to that even people of God do bad things. And it's just, and I feel like if you are a man of God and you did something that bad, then you aren't actually a man of God because you weren't following it in the first place. But I've been working on a project where I'm standing up for these kids. I'm collecting interviews. I'm taking it to the board, and I will not be standing for anything like that happening while I'm around. And I feel like churches could also go help and see that there are problems there too, and they need to be believed and they need to be heard. And the gun violence that Shane was talking about too, I feel like that's a really big thing, especially here in Kentucky, and the heroin needles, that's huge. The opioid epidemic is crazy here in Kentucky. My mom is a recovering addict herself, and I am so proud of her. But I can turn the corner here and I see people just walking by, these poor, struggling kids. There are teenagers in the streets here not being helped by anyone. There are no good Samaritans in this town. One of my best friends had a broken leg and was laying in the street beside an abandoned house and nobody helped him. This was before we were friends, so I couldn't do anything because I didn't even live here. And it's just awful. And there's a lot that I feel needs to be worked on and addressed with and helped by the church community.
I was waiting to hear a little word of wisdom there from Sarah. That was great, Carson. I'm glad to share, but I wanted to see if Sarah wanted to say anything first.
I think Sarah may be having some additional technological difficulties.
Oh, okay, cool. I just didn't want to take up too much space.
No, I appreciate that, Shane. Thank you.
I appreciated that, Carson. And I'm writing something right now related to what Carson was sharing, which is around having a better ethic of life, because I grew up saying I was pro-life, but in reality, I was pro-birth. I only thought about one issue of life, which was abortion. And on almost every other issue of life, Christians have often been on the wrong side. Like we're the highest supporters of the death penalty. We're the largest demographic of gun owners in America are white evangelical Christians. And so, I mean, whether it's the Black Lives Matter movement, on immigration, on the environment, on so many things, we have a terrible ethic of life, especially white evangelicals. I don't want to paint too broadly with a big brush, but I think we need to reassert what it means to be for life, is to say that every single person is made in the image of God. And if we can't unequivocally emphatically say Black Lives Matter or trans lives matter, then we have a narrow vision of what it means to be for life and to appreciate that every person is an image bearer of the divine. And so I think, there's something beautiful that God so loves the world, but there's also something beautiful about God loving Shane and Carson and Sarah and David and everybody on this call, and I think that's part of what Jesus does is really kind of make that personal for us. And so we need to be that personal, and in saying Black Lives Matter doesn't mean white lives don't matter. It's just kind of emphasizing like what 400 years of history has contradicted. So I think we just as there's a scripture that says the parts of the body they're talking about, the human community or the church, the parts of the body that have been marginalized are actually given special honor. And so that idea that the last are first, the first are last, the mighty are coming down from their thrones, the lowly are lifted. Like I want to be a part of that momentum. I want to lift up the people that this world has crushed, and we want to call down those who have been too mighty on their thrones. Thanks.
Thank you, Shane. So as we get close to time, we're going to start to wrap it up. Carson, I'm wondering if you have, in a minute or two, if you have any last minute words of wisdom that you want to impart on us.
Everyone should be heard, and everyone should be lifted up. And faith communities should work on that. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Carson. And Shane.
Well, again, it's just been lovely to be with all of you. And the image that comes to mind is the place when I think of Jesus in the scripture, when he says that I've not come for the healthy, but I've come for the sick. I haven't come for the righteous, but for the broken, and Jesus says some of his harshest words to the religious elite and to the self-righteous. And he says, you're a brood of vipers. Jesus says this to the religious people. the tax collectors and those who have been exploited sexually are coming into the kingdom ahead of you. So the very people that much of Christianity have excluded and marginalized are the people that Jesus was absolutely magnetized to. And I guess I would say, I'm constantly reminding myself of this too, is that we Jesus is bigger than the worst thing that Christians have done. So let's not let the most toxic versions of Christianity colonize the whole narrative. And so as you look for partners, know that in our network we've got folks all over the country that are going to be allies of yours and trying to care for those who have been really crushed and those who are struggling. And that's not in spite of our faith. It's because of it, because we follow, Jesus, who came as a brown-skinned Palestinian refugee in the middle of a genocide and died on a cross, like literally joining those who are on the margins, not just coming to help them, but coming as them. And so that's the Christ I follow. And I'm so glad to make some new friends. So thanks, David.
Thank you, Shane. Thank you so much for the wisdom of all three of you. Carson, Sarah, Shane, I so greatly appreciate these opportunities. I find that they're more rare than I wish they were, but always get something out of these conversations, and just the opportunity to be able to listen to each of you and to be able to learn from you. It's so greatly appreciated. And again, thank you so much for joining all. As we get ready to end for today, I do want to thank you all for attending. We do ask that, and we do want to be able to hear from you to keep bringing you these free resources. So if you can please take a few moments to give us your feedback. A link to the feedback form will be included in a follow-up email that's sent immediately following today's session. And your completion of that survey is important and a part of our quality control into our future funding for this project, as it allows for us to continue to provide you with resources and training at no cost. And so if you could take a few moments to let us know your thoughts, we would greatly appreciate it. In 2 weeks from now, on the 17th, we do have our next webinar. That webinar is going to be on strategies for partnering with faith communities in systems of care. And as a part of that, we're going to be fortunate to have Michael Cox, who is a mental health first aid trainer, a former minister, and someone who still continues to do a lot of work with youth and young adults across the country. And so I'm excited for us to be able to hear from Michael as we begin that conversation. We do want to encourage you to connect with us. If you have questions, have a TA request, other things that you're looking for, that's our email, our phone number, as well as our social media pages. Would love to be able to connect with you and hear from you. Thank you again so much for all of your time today and for joining us on this busy Friday. Hope you all have a great weekend, and we look forward to seeing you on the 17th.